At family dinner, my mom, Colleen, slammed her fork down so hard the sound made me jump. She leaned forward, eyes sharp, and hissed, "You're too stupid to live here, get out." For a moment, everything stopped. My stepdad, Stanley, didn't even look up, just kept chewing like nothing had happened. My younger siblings, Marcy and Jonah, stared at their plates as if they hadn't heard a thing. No one defended me, no one spoke, and the silence was heavier than her words. I sat there frozen, my face burning. I had spent the whole week juggling 2 jobs, coming home late, and still handing over money to help with bills. I thought maybe tonight we'd have a calm dinner, maybe a little peace. Instead, I was humiliated in front of the people who were supposed to care about me. My throat tightened, but I refused to let her see me cry. Colleen pushed her chair back, stormed out, and came back with a black trash bag. She started grabbing random things from my room without even asking. I couldn't believe it. After everything I had done, after all the hours I worked to help this house stay afloat, she was throwing me out like garbage. Stanley wiped his mouth, stood up, and muttered, "She's right. You need to learn." That was all he said before walking off. Marcy whispered, "Sorry," as she picked at her food, but she didn't look at me. Jonah wouldn't even glance my way. My grandmother sat quietly in her corner, frail and silent, as though she'd seen this before and didn't want to interfere. My whole chest felt hollow. In that moment, I realized I didn't have a family. I was just someone they tolerated until they didn't need me anymore. When Colleen shoved the bag into my arms, I stood up slowly, trying not to shake. I had about $30 in my wallet and no plan. Still, I couldn't stay. Not after she had said those words. I walked toward the door, every step heavy, every second expecting anyone to call me back. No one did. I closed the door behind me, and the night air hit my face. Outside, I stood on the porch with the trash bag at my feet. The house glowed warmly behind me, but it didn't feel like home. It hadn't felt like home in years, maybe never. I carried the bag to my old truck, tossed it in the back, and climbed inside. For a long time, I just sat there gripping the steering wheel, numb. I told myself I wouldn't let her words define me. Maybe I didn't have a roof over my head anymore, but I had freedom. I had a chance to prove her wrong. She thought I was too stupid to live there. Fine. I would live without her, without that house, without their cruelty. And one day, they'd see exactly what kind of person they had thrown away. When I was a kid, I never felt like I belonged in that house. Colleen, my mom, had 2 more children after me, and from the start, it was clear she treated them differently. Marcy was her golden girl, and Jonah was her little prince. They could do no wrong in her eyes. If they made a mess, she laughed it off. If they talked back, she said they were just being kids. But if I so much as forgot to take out the trash, she would snap at me and call me useless. I tried so hard to make her proud, but nothing I did was ever enough. When I brought home good grades, she barely noticed. When Marcy came home with a B, she clapped and told her she was brilliant. It wasn't just the attention she gave them, it was the way she looked at them compared to me. With them, her face softened. With me, her eyes were sharp, like she was always waiting for me to mess up. My real dad had left when I was 8. I still remember the night he packed a small bag and walked out. I cried for him for weeks, hoping he'd come back. He didn't. After that, Colleen remarried Stanley, and everything got worse. He never hit me, never raised his voice, but the way he treated me was like I wasn't part of the family at all. He'd call me the extra when he thought it was funny, or your kid when he spoke to Colleen about me. It was always clear I was his burden, not his responsibility. As Marcy and Jonah grew up, Stanley spoiled them with gifts, new bikes, new clothes, birthday parties that made them beam with joy. For me, nothing. Sometimes he would give me a used pair of sneakers he didn't want anymore, or he'd say, "Be grateful we put a roof over your head." I wasn't allowed to complain. If I did, Colleen would jump in and tell me to stop acting entitled. When I got old enough to work, I thought maybe things would change. I started with small jobs, stocking shelves, mowing lawns, later picking up shifts at a diner. I gave some of the money to Colleen, hoping she'd see I was trying. She never said thank you. She just started expecting it. Soon, it wasn't even a choice, it was an obligation. Every paycheck, she'd ask how much I was giving for the house. If I kept a little for myself, She'd accuse me of being selfish. Meanwhile, Marcy and Jonah never worked a day in their teens. Colleen said school was their job. She never told me that. Instead, she told me that if I didn't contribute, I was a burden. It didn't matter that I stayed up late finishing homework after long shifts. If I looked tired, she said I was being dramatic. If I asked for a ride or help with something, she'd snap that I should be independent. The hardest part wasn't the chores or the money. It was the feeling that I didn't matter. At holidays, everyone else got thoughtful gifts while I got socks or nothing at all. At family photos, I stood at the edge like an afterthought. Every day in that house reminded me that I wasn't truly part of their world. I thought that by proving myself, they'd see me differently. But the more I gave, the less I had left, and still they acted like it wasn't enough. I lived in the same house, ate at the same table, but I was never one of them. I was just someone they tolerated, a shadow in the corner, never seen as equal. Colleen didn't give me time to defend myself. She stomped down the hall, pulled a trash bag from the cabinet, and marched straight into my room. I followed her, numb, watching as she yanked clothes from drawers and tossed them into the bag without care. Shirts, pants, socks, everything landed in a crumpled pile. She didn't ask what I wanted to keep or what mattered to me. She just stuffed the bag until it was full, tied it up, and shoved it at me like I was nothing more than a guest who had worn out my welcome. I looked around my room, the only space I had ever been able to call my own, and saw the empty spots where my things had been. The walls looked bare, the bed stripped. My chest tightened, but I stood still, silent, because I knew if I spoke, I would either beg or break down. Neither would make a difference. She had already made up her mind. In the kitchen, Stanley leaned against the counter with his arms folded, watching the whole scene like it was a show. He didn't lift a finger to stop her. He didn't even look at me with sympathy. His face was blank, cold, like he'd been waiting for this moment. My grandmother sat in her chair by the window, hands folded in her lap. She didn't meet my eyes. Her silence cut worse than Colleen's words. She had always been quiet, but part of me had hoped she would step in. Instead, she stared at the floor, as if pretending none of this was happening. Marcy and Jonah sat at the table. Jonah hunched over, chewing the last of his food without a word. Marcy glanced at me, her lips trembling. She whispered sorry, so soft I barely heard it, but she didn't look up. She kept her eyes on her plate, like facing me would make her part of it too. The apology didn't reach me. It felt empty, like saying it was all she could do without angering our mom. I picked up the bag. It was heavy, pulling down on my arm. That single bag was supposed to represent my whole life in that house. $30 sat folded in my wallet, all I had to my name. No savings, no backup plan, nowhere to go. I stood in the doorway, waiting one last time for someone to stop me, to say I didn't have to leave, to remind me I was still family. No one did. Colleen crossed her arms and jerked her chin toward the door. "Go," she said, sharp and final. Her voice was like a blade cutting away the last tie I had. So I walked out. The door clicked shut behind me, and the house was silent again, like I had never been there. I stood on the porch, the night air cool against my skin, my bag digging into my hand. That house had been my prison for years, and now it had spat me out. I climbed into my old truck, dropped the bag onto the passenger seat, and started the engine. For the first time, I realized I was completely on my own. The first night was the hardest. I parked behind a laundromat, far enough that no one would notice but close enough that I could hear the hum of the machines through the wall. I leaned back in the seat of my old truck, staring at the ceiling, clutching the trash bag that held my clothes. The air was cold, and the seat was stiff. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come easy. Every sound outside made me jump, every car passing by made me wonder if someone would knock on the window and tell me to move. Days turned into weeks. The truck became my bedroom, my kitchen, and my only safe place. Each morning, I woke up stiff, wiped the condensation from the glass, and tried to convince myself I was fine. I walked to the YMCA where they let me shower for a few dollars a week. Standing under the hot water was the only time I felt human. I stayed as long as I could, pretending I had somewhere else to be when I left. Food was simple. Peanut butter, cheap bread, and sometimes a small jar of jelly if I had enough left over. Dollar store meals kept me alive, though never full. I sat in the truck with a sandwich in my hand, watching people walk by with grocery bags filled with real dinners, and felt a hollow ache in my stomach that wasn't just hunger. Nights were long. The laundromat buzzed behind me, the parking lot lights flickered, and sometimes strangers lingered nearby. I locked the doors and curled into the seat, clutching a blanket I had taken from the house. I thought about the warmth of a bed I'd never see again, but I didn't let myself cry. I didn't want to give Colleen or Stanley that satisfaction, even in my own thoughts. As lonely as it was, there was a strange kind of freedom in it. For the first time, I didn't have anyone breathing down my neck, waiting to call me stupid or lazy. Nobody looked at me like I was a burden. I had nothing, but it was mine. Each day I reminded myself I could survive, even if no one cared whether I did. I found small ways to hold on. I kept a notebook I'd bought with spare change, writing down every idea for how I could earn more. I cleaned the truck whenever I could, as if keeping it neat would stop me from falling apart. I told myself over and over that this wasn't the end, it was the start. Lying in the truck at night, staring at the dim glow of the laundromat sign, I made a promise to myself. If Colleen thought I was too stupid to live under her roof, I would prove her wrong by surviving without it. I didn't know how long it would take or what it would cost me, but I swore I would make something of myself. I would turn this bottom into the place I rose from. The job came by chance. I had been walking past the community college late one night when I saw a sign taped to the door about janitorial openings. It wasn't glamorous, but I didn't need glamorous. I needed something steady, something that would keep gas in my truck and food in my stomach. I wrote down the number, called the next day, and within a week, I was pushing a mop across quiet hallways after midnight. The pay was small, but it was more than I had before. I cleaned classrooms, emptied trash, and polished floors until they shined. The work was tiring, but it gave me a sense of purpose. Nobody sneered at me. Nobody called me names. I did the job, clocked out, and left knowing I had earned something honestly. That's where I met Mr. Landon. He was the night supervisor, a man in his 50s with a calm way about him. He didn't treat me like a burden. He noticed when I stayed late to make sure things were spotless. He saw that I never complained, even when the work was heavy. One night, as I stacked chairs, he walked over and asked about my plans. I didn't know how to answer. Plans had never been part of my life. Surviving day by day was all I could think about. He nodded, almost like he expected that answer, and told me about tuition assistance the college offered to employees. If I worked hard and stayed long enough, I could take classes for a fraction of the cost. The idea felt impossible at first. Me, going to college? I had barely scraped by in school while working jobs to keep Colleen off my back. But the thought stuck with me. For the first time, I saw a small door opening. I started saving. Every dollar that wasn't for food or gas went into an envelope I kept tucked under the seat of my truck. I skipped meals, stretched out groceries, and refused to waste money on anything extra. Slowly, the envelope grew. When I had enough to cover books and fees, I filled out the paperwork with Mr. Landon's help. The first class I signed up for was basic math. Sitting in that room after cleaning the same hallways hours earlier felt strange. I was older than most of the students, and I carried the weight of my past with me. But I paid attention. I studied in the truck with a flashlight when I had to, and I refused to let myself fall behind. With each semester, I added more classes. My life was still simple: work, study, sleep in the truck, but there was a spark inside me that hadn't been there before. I never called Colleen. I didn't write, didn't visit, didn't check in on holidays. I wanted them to believe I was gone, swallowed by the world they thought I couldn't handle. Meanwhile, I was building something they could never take credit for. Every night when I mopped the floors, I whispered to myself that this was only the beginning. I wasn't invisible anymore, not to myself. I was creating a life far from the one that had tried to destroy me. 4 years passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless work. I juggled classes with my janitor job, sometimes going days on only a few hours of rest. My body ached, my eyes burned, but I kept pushing because I had something to prove. Each test I passed, each paper I finished, felt like another brick laid on the path out of the life I had left behind. Accounting wasn't an easy field, but I liked the order of it. Numbers made sense. They didn't lie, they didn't twist themselves into insults like Colleen's words had. If I worked hard, the results showed up plain on the page. That reliability gave me strength. While other students worried about parties or dating, I sat in the library, determined to squeeze every drop of knowledge I could from those classes. When graduation day finally came, I sat in the crowd with my cap balanced on my head and my gown pressed flat. No one was in the audience for me, but I didn't care. I wasn't walking across that stage for them. I was walking for myself. When my name was called and the degree was placed in my hand, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The world had always told me I wasn't enough, and now I held proof that I was. After school, I applied to every accounting job I could find. Rejection letters piled up, but I kept sending applications. Finally, a firm in Ohio offered me a chance. It wasn't the biggest firm, but it was steady, respectable work, and it came with a salary I had only dreamed about when I was living out of my truck. Moving into my first apartment was surreal. The place was small, just a one-bedroom with thin walls and creaky floors, but it was mine. No one could barge in and tell me to leave. No one could toss my things into a trash bag. I stocked the fridge with more food than peanut butter and bread. Simple meals, pasta, chicken, rice, felt like feasts compared to the scraps I had been used to. The first night I slept in that apartment, I lay in a real bed, under clean sheets I had bought myself, staring at the ceiling. My stomach was full, my body was safe, and for once, I felt a sense of peace. Still, as much as I wanted to enjoy the calm, Colleen's voice haunted me. Those words from the dinner table echoed again and again, "You're too stupid to live here." Every time I settled into my new routine, commuting to work, balancing accounts, getting a paycheck deposited into my own bank account, I thought about that night. I remembered the way everyone had looked away while I was pushed out, and each success became a quiet form of defiance. Every raise, every bill I paid on time, every meal I cooked in my own kitchen, was proof that I wasn't stupid. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. And I knew deep down that my journey wasn't only about building a future, it was also about carrying that memory with me, letting it fuel me, and never letting myself forget where I came from. I was pushing a cart through the grocery store, focused on my list, when I heard a voice call my name. At first, I thought I imagined it. Then I turned and saw my grandmother standing at the end of the aisle. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders slumped, her hair thin and grey. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, but there was something heavy behind them, something like shame. I hadn't seen her in years. For a moment, I didn't know whether to hug her or keep walking. But she stepped closer, clutching her purse with trembling hands, and I couldn't bring myself to turn away. "You've grown into such a fine man," she said softly. Her voice shook, and I realized she must have been carrying a lot since I left. I nodded, unsure what to say. She asked how I'd been, and I kept it simple, told her I had work, an apartment, and was doing fine. I didn't mention the nights in the truck or the years of struggle. She didn't need to know that part. Her eyes watered as she looked down at her hands. "I need to tell you something," she whispered, glancing around as if afraid someone might hear. I leaned closer, and that's when she told me. Stanley had left Colleen. He walked out without warning, just like my father had years ago. The house was in foreclosure because the bills hadn't been paid. My siblings were gone, Marcy off to another state with a boyfriend, Jonah drifting from job to job, hardly in touch. And Colleen, she was drowning. "She needs your help," my grandmother said, her voice breaking. The words hit me harder than I expected. I stood there in the middle of the store, gripping the cart, my chest tight. For years, I had dreamed of hearing that she finally faced consequences. Now it was real. The woman who had thrown me out, who had told me I wasn't worth a place under her roof, was falling apart. And my grandmother was asking me to step back into that world. I stared at the shelves in front of me, not knowing what to say. Memories of that night came flooding back, the trash bag, the silence at the table, the door closing behind me. I thought about the years in the truck, the hunger, the exhaustion, the loneliness, all of it caused by the same person who now wanted my help. I looked at my grandmother, frail and desperate, and I realized she was caught in the middle. She wasn't asking for herself. She was asking because she still loved her daughter, no matter how cruel that daughter had been. Her loyalty made my stomach twist. I told her I would think about it. She squeezed my hand like she was clinging to the hope I'd say yes. I watched her walk away slowly, her figure fading down the aisle. My groceries sat forgotten in the cart as I stood there, torn between the life I had built and the past I thought I'd escaped. I sat in my car for a long time before I finally turned onto the street I once called home. The houses around it looked the same, but when I pulled up in front of Colleen's, it was clear things had changed. The yard was overgrown, weeds curling through cracks in the driveway, paint peeled from the siding, and one of the shutters hung crooked, banging softly against the wall in the wind. It didn't look like the house I remembered. It looked tired, like it had given up. I walked up the steps, each one creaking under my weight. For a moment, I thought about turning back, but something in me wanted to see it through. I knocked, and the door swung open slowly. Colleen stood there. She gasped when she saw me. Her face was lined, her hair streaked with grey, and her eyes, once sharp and full of fire, looked dull. She wasn't the woman who had slammed her fork down and told me to leave. She looked smaller, weaker, almost fragile. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I waited for anger, for another insult, but instead her voice cracked when she said my name. I didn't think you'd come. I stepped inside, and the house felt even worse from within. The furniture sagged, dust coated the corners, and the air smelled faintly of damp. It was quiet, too quiet, like all the life had been drained from the walls. I looked around and couldn't find a trace of the family that once filled it. Colleen shut the door behind me and leaned against it, as if standing was too much. I need your help, she said, her words shaking. She tried to meet my eyes, but her gaze kept darting away. I can't pay the bills. The bank's taking the house. I don't know what to do. She clasped her hands together, her knuckles white. It was the first time I had ever heard her admit weakness. Growing up, she always had control, always barked orders, always made me feel small. But here she was, stripped of all that power, her voice breaking as she asked for help from the son she had thrown out like trash. I stood in the middle of the room, my arms heavy at my sides, and watched her. Part of me wanted to feel pity, to step in, to fix what she had broken. Another part of me remembered every cruel word, every time she looked past me, every night I had slept in the cold while she sat warm inside this house. She asked again, this time softer, almost pleading, please, I just need a little to get back on my feet. The silence stretched between us. I studied her face and realized the woman in front of me wasn't the one I had feared all those years. She was broken, desperate, and for the first time, powerless. I didn't answer right away. I just let her words hang in the air, the same air where once she told me I wasn't worth a place here. I stood there and listened to her ask for help, the room pressing in around us. She trembled, voice small and raw. My chest felt like it had two different hearts, one that wanted to rush forward and fix everything, and another that remembered every cut, every night I had gone without. I had spent so long proving I could survive without her. Suddenly she wanted me to save the life she had let fall apart. I met her eyes and kept my voice steady. I told her I remembered how she treated me, how she pushed me out when I had nothing left. I told her I had built my life from scratch while she kept hers. I said I wasn't the person who would come running back just because she needed a lifeline now. My words were calm, but they landed like stones. She started to cry then, real, loud sobs that made her shoulders shake. She reached toward me as if to grab hold. Please, she said, pleading in a way I had never heard from her before. I made mistakes. I'm sorry. I'm scared. The sound of her apology was thin and brittle. For a moment, old feelings welled up inside me. I remembered the nights I had wished for a different parent, the times I had swallowed my anger and kept going. Even as part of me softened, another part burned with memory. I thought of every insult that had been tossed at me, the way family dinners had felt like trials. I thought of the nights I slept with my back to the steering wheel, of the work I'd done to earn a place that belonged to me and me alone. If I gave in now, it would feel like erasing all of that hard work. I had changed. I had paid my own bills, signed my own lease, and learned to stand without leaning on anyone who had hurt me. She begged for the smallest thing, a loan to get past the next month, a promise that I would help her find a place to stay. I listened and kept my face still. I told her that I would not fix what she had broken with my hands. I said that I would not be part of a life where my kindness could be used as an excuse to keep hurting me. I explained that my help would only come if it was honest and fair, not if it meant her controlling me again. Her expression crumpled. For the first time, I saw the full weight of regret on her face. She called my name, tried to reach for me, pleaded in every way she could think of. But I had learned to hear desperation and stand apart from it. I stepped back, put my coat on, and told her I would not be her safety net in the same house where she had shown me so little mercy. I walked out of that room without slamming the door. The air on the porch felt sharp and clean. I did not turn around when the door clicked shut. I did not listen for her voice. I put my hands in my pockets and walked away slowly, each step deliberate, as if I were leaving a chapter behind. When I reached my car, I sat for a moment and let the engine idle. A strange calm settled over me. The anger that had pushed me forward all those years softened into something steadier, a quiet resolve. I had not yelled or caused a scene. I had not yelled back or broken anything. My revenge was not a spectacle. It was simple and final. I chose myself, my safety, and my dignity over re-entering a life that had once thrown me out. Then I drove away, feeling both heavier and lighter, knowing I had closed a door without slamming it, but also knowing I would not be stepping back through it again. I never went back to that house. Once I drove away, it became part of the past, a place I carried in memory but no longer in my life. I stopped wondering what Colleen was doing, where Jonah or Marcy had gone, or whether Stanley ever thought of me. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. The difference was that mine led me forward. Work became more than a paycheck. At the firm, I found people who respected me because of what I could do, not because of what I could give them. For the first time, I felt seen. My boss trusted me with real projects, my co-workers invited me out for lunch, and I was no longer invisible. That steady rhythm of work and growth built the foundation I had always wanted under me. Mr. Landon stayed in my life too. Long after my janitor days were behind me, he checked in, asked how I was doing, and gave advice when I needed it. He became the father figure I never really had, never demanding, never dismissive, just supportive in the quiet ways that mattered. Having someone like him in my corner reminded me I didn't need the family I was born into. I could choose people who treated me with care. Over time, I built friendships. Not many, but the kind that mattered. Friends who showed up when I was sick, who remembered my birthday without me saying a word, who listened when I talked about the darker years without judgment. We went out for dinners, celebrated milestones, and leaned on each other when life grew heavy. It was a different kind of family, one made from choice and trust rather than blood and obligation. Then came Elena. Meeting her felt like finding something I didn't realize I had been missing. She didn't ask about my past right away. She just got to know me as I was, not the broken pieces behind me. In time, I told her everything. I braced for her to pull away, but she didn't. Instead, she looked at me with steady eyes and said, "You didn't just survive, you rebuilt." She didn't pity me. She admired me. That was something I had never felt before. We built a life together, piece by piece. A home that felt warm because it was filled with laughter, not shouting. Meals at a table where everyone's voice mattered. Plans for a future we both wanted, not one that was forced on us. With her, I learned what family could really mean when love and respect were at the core. Looking back, I understood something important. Revenge wasn't about shouting, breaking, or proving anyone wrong in their face. Revenge was living well despite the betrayal. Every success, every smile, every night I came home to a place that was truly mine, that was revenge enough. Colleen once told me I was too stupid to live in her house. In the end, she was right, though not in the way she meant. I was too smart to keep living under her roof, too strong to keep carrying her cruelty. I was meant to live better, freer, and without her shadow over me. And that's exactly what I did.